Hello, my name is Agata Lulkowska. I'd like to thank you for choosing my presentation. I'll be talking about local research with global consequences on the example of a practice-based research in film. I'd like to invite you to northern part of Colombia and region called Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta. This beautiful place is inhabited by 4 indigenous communities: the Cogis, the Arhuacos, the Wiva, and the Cancuamos. Now, most of them, all of them practically, live in beautiful traditional villages. This one here on the photograph is the Cancabarua, is one of the Kogi villages. And they all live in a very traditional way, wearing beautiful white clothes, cooking together, eating together, and deciding all the urgent matters of the community together. Now, before I take you any further, I'd like to reflect on the nature of a practice-based research, and in this very case focused on film. For someone coming from an artistic background, it both brings joy and also poses many challenges. And this is because of the struggle to satisfy the aesthetics while at the same time retaining academic rigor required by research. Interestingly enough, it really resonates with the struggles of my participants who wish to communicate their worries to external audiences, but to do so, they must obey the rules of Western audiovisual communication. It's probably time to introduce you to Amado Villafagna, whom you see on the screen right now. Never interested in film or photography, he spent most of his life as a farmer. Everything has changed when, due to a violent situation in Colombia, he was threatened and displaced from his village. Following an advice of his community elders, he decided that the only way to resolve the situation is to communicate his worries with the non-indigenous audiences in hope to find allies. With the help of Pablo Mora, a filmmaker and academic, he managed to get training and support to initiate his project and engage in the production of his first film. Now, when I met Amado and his collective, Zigoneshi, they were about 10 years into the process. They were very vocal about being able to speak for themselves. They believed that if someone else does it, it presents them as a community from the past, which is clearly not the case. They were also very vocal about protecting the ownership of the image taken in a Sierra and being in control of the politics of representation. Despite past misrepresentations by some external filmmakers, they really understood the value of intercultural collaborations, which can help them push their ideas forward and disseminate their message further, which was the very core reason of why they engaged in filmmaking in the first place. So by then, they have published 9 DVDs with films translated into English, Spanish, and French, and they travel the world showcasing their productions. They would present their films at various national and international film festivals, at the universities, at the local level, and also in wider Colombia, and as I said, Latin America and abroad. But the very interesting thing is that they also always brought their films back into their villages. So what you can see here on this photograph is a very clumsy screenshot of a film I made with them, which basically documented all the struggles and attempts to make the films and to communicate, to push them to international and local audiences. So it's very important to mention that Villafagna, whose profile became increasingly influential. For example, here on this slide we see him on the left-hand side in Italy, on the right-hand side in Paris. He really has never forgotten that his work has to be directed not only at the international audiences, but also at his people. And I think it's important to mention that before he was able to make his first film, he really went into a lot of trouble trying to explain the reason behind this to his community elders. He needed to get their approval, and he needed to explain to people who still remember the cameras of directors like Antonio Vidal Rosso, who in his film El Valle de los Arhuacos, which was made in 1964, presented them basically as drunkards who have packed with the devil. So on this photograph here, that's one of the meetings with the community, and you can see Villafaña with a projector and a screen behind him, where he basically gives examples of different videos or videos made by him, but also some videos, for example, captured by tourists and presenting the Arhuacos in a way which was not very nice. And he was educating his community, trying to explain to them the importance of being able to produce equality self-representations, which can then be shared with the external world in order to negotiate the communication and the way they could be treated as subjects, but also as the ones who have their own voice. There was also a very, very important and fascinating questions of the richness of the Arhuaco culture for the audiences. And it wasn't really just a question of the language. So most of the film made by Villafaña are made in local language, Arhuaco, which then are translated into Spanish, which are then translated into English, French, Italian, or whatever other language. Even bigger problem was with translating the ideas and concepts. So when I helped my participants with the editing of subtitles for their recent film, I have realized that very often they really struggle to explain complex Arhuaco mythology or customs into Spanish, simply because there was no equivalent of this concept in Western cultures. Another big question was visual communication. So filmmaking really requires an acquisition of a film language and the proficiency to communicate visually. Now, we have to remember that we're talking about a community with no tradition in filmmaking or no tradition in writing by that means. And of course, if you realize that they live in a very traditional way, you probably guess that there is no electricity in the villages, therefore they have no TVs and no access to examples of films and documentaries from around the globe. Of course, it's very different for Villafaña at this moment, because after being displaced, he does live in a city, even though he spends most of his time in the Sierra. And of course, he has seen films and he has been trained to get some fluency in this. Nevertheless, the community itself does not have very long visual heritage they could base their activity upon. Now, I've mentioned the elders of the community. It's very interesting to notice that the way they communicate within the Arhuaco culture is really by having these very, very long meetings where every single member of the community has to be present. Now, very often, these meetings last for hours. One of them I participated at lasted until 5 a.m. with no breaks. Some people falling asleep, waking up, but really the communication was going on until everyone agreed about whatever it was that they were discussing. In this kind of situation, you will never really interrupt an elder who tries to explain a certain concept or remind their community about an important issue. Very often, this kind of monologues again would last for hours. Now, of course, in case of filmmaking, they always wanted to include the elders because this is where the community wisdom sits. However, there was a necessity to follow different time requirements. There was a necessity to fit these long monologues within the film duration. Of course, it could be achieved in two different ways, by explaining the requirement to the elders beforehand, or editing the monologue afterwards, which caused some problematic issues for the filmmaker who felt that to be slightly disrespectful. And of course, the question of understanding audiences, so narrative and storytelling, had to be comprehensible for the audiences unfamiliar with the Arhuaco way. In order to reach these audiences in the first place, also distribution and marketing had to be deployed. Now, in recent few months, the most current project they're working on, called El Buen Vivir, also made in collaboration with Pablo Mora, who always supports the community. Now, this project is very interesting because not only does it contain a short TV series, but also a podcast and several 360 experiences. Of course, there is a website. The videos are regularly transferred into YouTube after being broadcast. And probably the most interesting element of this project is the mission they apply to it, which says we want to offer our solution models to various problems relating to contemporary lives. I think this is really interesting and really encapsulates the philosophy of the community, which in essence feels responsible for the entire humanity, calling us, Western people, their younger brothers, and them being the elder brothers, being responsible for the actions of the humans and also for the protection of the planet. At the same time, it's a fascinating thing to notice that being so deeply engaged with this kind of core values related to the nature and protection of the planet, the community really evolves with the technology, not only in terms of how they develop their filmmaking practices, but also how they start to use more and more different techniques and platforms. Another thing which is worth mentioning is in their last film, I've noticed they increasingly start using drones, so they really try to be up to date with the contemporary filmmaking practices, which again is even more interesting if you keep in mind that Villafana always repeated that he's not an artist, but a threatened Arhuaco who wants to communicate his worries. And although he did admit that with time and experience, he got to really enjoy the visual beauty of images, and he's definitely in control of all the aspects of filmmaking. He is proficient when it comes to the technical elements of it. He knows everything about aperture and lenses. He still considers himself to be communicator at best, and definitely not the artist, which is a very humble approach, which really proves that he, despite his success and international recognition, he has not lost the very aim which pushed him into filmmaking in the first place. Now, the next question we should ask is really, who is the audience, and then who can benefit from this research? I dare to say that research is not just for academics. Of course, we love and enjoy it, and it's a great pleasure to participate in various conferences and read journals and get excited about other people, others' research. But it really should benefit the society. I think this is at the very core of why we do research in the first place. And of course, it should contribute to knowledge. It should help us understand things. And with this in mind, we should ask, who is the audience for this kind of things, especially for a practice-based research in film, since film, by its very nature, originated as entertainment. Well, this discussion is very long, so I don't want to perhaps start it right now. But definitely, it's part of our everyday life, not only for academics and researchers, it's part of most of the people's life these days. And as a consequence, I'd like to ask, can this kind of research attract regular cinema goers? And when I say this kind of research, I really, in this case, reflect or refer both to my film, which is made about what they do, but also their films, so the very subject and the product. So I guess it brings us to another extremely important question, which I don't really talk too much in this presentation, but I really want to make sure that it is addressed. So, question of ethics. I can see multiple benefits of a collaborative approach in similar projects because it simply secures an ethical and fair approach to the politics of representation. After all, the question who has the right to represent whom, for what reason, and with what intention really remains at the core of all the ethnographic work. Now, to conclude, small, local research could definitely have global impact. For the participants, it gives their voice a louder, far-reaching volume. For me, as a person who is fascinated by the possibilities of art/practice-based research, it provides me with some guidelines in leading future researchers following this pathway. Global technologies, such as the invention of non-expensive digital filmmaking, not only revolutionized film industry itself, but it can also present small indigenous communities with an opportunity which they've never had before. Going the other way, a small research project hidden in a Colombian jungles can help us understand the power of the diversity and equality of voices arriving from around the globe, which is an extremely important issue. And perhaps practice-based research can benefit from relying on more universal medium in achieving more powerful reach. Finally, I believe that transcultural approach make it more universal by including researchers, participants, artists from different backgrounds. I guess it's easier for us to understand the core values of what makes us human, and I think that's what makes this kind of research somehow more accessible. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Please get in touch if you have any questions and comments. This is my email. You can also find me on my website, if that makes sense. And I also leave my anchor for the Twitter. So I'll be delighted to hear any questions and comments, and of course get in touch with anyone who is interested in any kind of collaboration for any similar projects. Thank you very much and have a great afternoon.